Every Monday, we're joined by Nigel Fletcher, political historian and co-founder of the Centre for Opposition Studies. Morning, Nigel.
Morning, Matt.
It's good to have you with us, or us doing our silly feature against a backdrop of course, what's happening in Russia.
Yeah, indeed. I think it's worth noting. I think that opposition comes in many forms, and so I think that the biography you just did of President Zelensky really sort of highlights the fact that that's opposition of a completely different order that we should all be inspired by. And we're also fortunate, of course, that opposition here in the UK is free and peaceful, despite the occasional duels that we've talked about in recent weeks. But of course, in Russia, there's no such freedom. And if we're talking about leaders of the opposition of the week, I think it's worth just reading out some names. Alexander Litvinenko, Sergei Magnitsky, and of course, Boris Nemtsov. Just three of the Russians who've opposed the Putin regime, who've been murdered by the Russian state over the last 20 years. And of course, there are many more. So I think we should really honour their memory today and never take democratic opposition in this country or any other for granted.
Absolutely right, Nigel. A point well worth making. Let's turn our attention then to who is today's slightly abridged leader of the opposition of the week.
Yes, in 4 minutes, go. Okay, this week's leader of the opposition is John Charles Herries, frequently known as just J.C. Herries in his time. And he was one of the older opposition leaders that we've looked at in this slot. He was born in 1778. And what's also important to note about him is, unlike many of the others we've talked about, he wasn't an aristocrat. He was the son of a London merchant who later went bankrupt. And he was then educated not at Eton and Oxbridge, but at Cheam and the University of Leipzig. So he's already a bit different. And the other thing that's interesting about him is he didn't enter Parliament for quite some time. His early career was as a junior clerk in the Treasury, and he then was promoted rapidly, taking on sort of a role almost as a sort of political advisor to various Treasury ministers. The Secretary to the Treasury, Nicholas Vansittart, was one during the government of all the talents that we talked about in previous weeks. He was an advisor to him. He then became an advisor to Spencer Perceval when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer and helped write the budget in 1810. I took on a number of other really sort of quite significant posts in the Treasury as an official. And it wasn't really until 1823, sometime later, that he was becoming an MP and then was appointed to high office himself. And of course went to the Treasury and became Chancellor of the Exchequer himself in 1827. He then sort of played a role in various governments after that. Robert Peel's government, he was in that as a significant figure as well. So he was somebody who'd had a long and distinguished career, both as an official and also as a minister and as a Treasury minister before he became leader of the opposition. And his time in opposition is, as we talked about last week, during this odd job share that happened after the Tories split over the Corn Laws. He was actually out of Parliament when that happened, but then returned to Parliament in 1847 and became an influential voice alongside Bentinck, who we talked about a few weeks ago, and of course Benjamin Disraeli. And it was after his death, the death of Bentinck and the resignation of the Marquess of Granby, that he agreed at the age of 70 to take on this joint leadership of the protectionist Conservatives. And really he was there as a sort of grandee to kind of stabilise this kind of group of three. Disraeli, as we've talked about before, was not really trusted by the overall leader of the Conservatives at the time, Lord Stanley, later the Earl of Derby. And so they wanted to have somebody there who was a bit more sort of established, and he sort of provided the ballast to that ticket.
Well, there we are, Nigel. Thank you for that. It's amazing that the protectionist Conservatives had sort of three leaders: the Marquess of Granby, Benjamin Disraeli, and John Charles Herries, who's our leader of the opposition of the week. Of course, Disraeli is discounted from our feature because he went on to be Prime Minister. And that's against the rules as far as our leader of the opposition is concerned. Really good to speak to you as ever, Nigel. Nigel Fletcher there, political historian, co-founder at the Centre for Opposition Studies. He'll be back next week with another leader of the opposition of the week. Up next here on Time.